Bryan Smeltzer, president and founder of Liquid Mind, a global branch. Wow, this guy's bio is longer than a Bible. Coming up in the lab, Bryan Smeltzer joining us, brand disruptor. The guy's done a lot. Today in the lab, myself, Keith Bilous.
Hi, I'm Keith Bilous, and this is Live in the Lab. All right. A little bit of weirdness in front of the camera there for anybody who's watching, because I'm like, hey, where's the button? Where's the button? I can't get it going. How did you go viral on TikTok? You were on America's Got Talent. How much do you get paid to be on AGT? Oh, you didn't get paid. Keith and Steve here in Live in the Lab.
You're a great interviewer. I love it.
48 miles, 48 hours. And not just once. You ain't seen nothing yet. I hit 50 last time, and I'm like, yeah, things are a little different than they were 10 years ago. So trust me, things are to keep. You have no time for the BS that much of society seems to put on the table. Why is that? What you're talking about is real right now. There's just no bullshit here, but it's just real. We brought you in with some Marley. I said, Joseph, let's talk music for a second. You said, Keith, oldies, 60s, 70s, and 80s. I've never talked to a sir before. Why are you a sir? In many ways, we're the same story. I came from nothing. You came from nothing. I think the old saying goes that if you want a trophy, you climb Everest. If you want respect, you climb K2. I've built an AI myself, and it's pretty fascinating when you can have a conversation with yourself with your own knowledge. Have you done that before? Why are we rushing to make these tools if all they're going to do is hurt humanity? Does the world need an Oppenheimer moment with AI?
What a fun show.
Nation. So why do some brands thrive for generations? Why do some fail? What do you suspect the formula for success is? I know. We got a guy on the show today who has that success for formula. Bryan Smeltzer's joining me in a few moments. He knows the answer to this question. I know how he knows. I read his bio. It's pretty thick. We'll get to that in a second. But Bryan knows the answer to this question. He knows what makes a brand truly visionary. What makes a personal brand truly visionary? What makes a business brand truly visionary? Today, Bryan Smeltzer joining me. The guy has worked for Oakley, the sunglass company, K-Swiss, TaylorMade, Adidas. Oh, can I be 12 right now? Is it like all day I dream about, like I'm 12 right now. Adidas. All day I dream about what? Shoot sports? No, I didn't say shit sports. I said shoot sports. I think I'm saying it right. And of course, Arena. Bryan Smeltzer, the guy's been behind all those brands. And you know what? He's my neighbor. Yeah, the guy grew up down the road, just down the road over there in North Dakota. So he's going to come up in a couple of minutes. But before we do that, I got to show you guys something. I told Bryan before he came in, I'm like, dude, I show love through jest. This is the guy's bio. Yeah. I went to bed with it last night. It's 800 pages. He sent me an email 38 times just saying, hey, here's the bio, Keith. I'm like, I got it, man. It's in the back of my brain. I understand you're a visionary about brand building. I get it. The guy's got a visionary podcast. Don't hold it against him, though. Nope. You know how we feel about podcasts here in the lab. So if you're looking for a show of substance, I invite you to go listen to Bryan's show. But if you're looking for a show with some humor, fun, entertaining, and informative conversation, you're here in the lab today with myself and Bryan. All right, so before we do that, though, I got a reminder for you guys. I got a quick reminder. We talked about it on the morning show today. Hey, Bryan, I got a morning show. Yeah, you're still sleeping at that time. We go live Monday to Friday over here on LinkedIn, YouTube, X, Instagram, every streaming platform that will have us. We go live Monday to Friday, 8 o'clock Eastern time, talking to some of the world's most awesome people and having some of the world's most awesome conversations. So I would invite you to tune in and hear things like our accountability check-in. We know many of you are like, I don't want to get out of bed today. I'm struggling to get going. I think I'm an entrepreneur, but I'm really a wantrepreneur. Or are you? So what we do in the lab is we offer you things to think about. We make suggestions, we make recommendations so you can make the decisions. One of those recommendations and suggestions we make, and we made this morning, was if you want to be an exceptional LinkedIn creator, everyday human being. Be empathetic. That's your superhero skills. So I would invite you to go check out the post on LinkedIn today about the superhero power behind being a great creator. And it's not anything you think. Yeah, it's showing up, sure. Yeah, it's making great content, sure. But what it really means, nation, it means being empathetic to the human on the other side of the pen, the human on the other side of the screen. In a world of AI-generated stuff everywhere, the power of the human, more powerful than ever. It's true. So I invite you to consider that as you go through your day today. Think about empathy. It'll be magical. It'll solve problems for you. It'll make you closer to the person you're talking to. Think about it. Empathy, your superpower. Your little tip today, the golden nugget from the lab. All right, let's bring in Bryan Smeltzer. Bryan, I've been having problems with the name all day today. True story. Yeah, I've been saying it since I got up this morning and I just can't get it out correctly. So I'm going to say it once again. Bryan Smeltzer joining me here in the lab. What's shaking, my friend?
How you doing, Keith? What do you mean that good old German name is hard to pronounce? What's up with that? I like you said, I don't know how far it was from the border, but we have some good stories going back to Winnipeg days. I think I was about 90 miles from where you were at.
Yeah.
Out in the racetrack, cleaning stalls, and so earning my keep early on in life for free tickets.
There you go. So Bryan reveals to me, Nation, before we get in the lab this morning for a quick little 1 minute hello. He's like, hey, I used to hang out just up the road for you. I'm like, where's that? He goes, at the horse track. I'm like, well, that's just straight southeast from here right now. So I have to ask, were you a jockey? Were you a cleaner? Were you a horse owner? Or what brought you to the track?
Observer. A friend of mine had a horse actually and aspired to be a jockey, but unfortunately grew too quick and couldn't stay on the horse. So those are two qualifiers for being a jockey that immediately eliminated me. So unfortunately, I got flagged to go do the stall cleaning, but at the very least, I got a free lunch and then a free ticket.
Too funny.
I can't remember what the name of the racetrack was, Keith. What was it called again? That's a tongue twister for me. I can't remember what it's called.
Yeah, it's Assiniboine Downs. It still is Assiniboine
Downs. It's still called that. Like I remember Edmonton Eskimos.
Yeah,
no, it was story. Winnipeg. So I'm a hockey guy as well. North Dakota, a true blue Fighting Sioux fan, and Winnipeg Blue Bombers.
That's right. That's right. And dude, and I see over your shoulder, you actually have the bison over your shoulder on the wall.
Yep. I played football at Nebraska. I finished up at North Dakota, and my dad is a NDSU graduate, and I'm a UND graduate. So I kept it up here, but I did the bison, but with no NDSU on it.
Okay, there you go. So you're a true business athlete, eh? You did sports, and I know you're an entrepreneur. We're going to get to that journey here in a few moments and your brand journey.
Yeah.
It's clear, though, that journey was precipitated by what happened in school.
Yeah, exactly. I was brought up independent to a fault. And growing up in the Midwest, it taught you very early on, and my family was the true blue collar family.
Yes.
And if you wanted something, you work for it.
Yes.
And at age 13, I learned that very quickly, that if you want an extra pair of shoes, it's not given to you. It's something you earn, and you earn through bussing tables. So early on, it was earn your own keep. But I'm very blessed that I had gone through that early on in life. It obviously taught me a lot as I moved forward.
You know what? I say this time and time again, Bryan. I had a guest on my show this morning, Nathan Hirsch, very successful entrepreneur from Colorado. He's on his fourth company now. He's had a couple of exits. Yeah. And I asked him the question, and you answered it just moments ago. You were 13 busting tables because your parents, I think probably, I'm reading between the lines, said, okay, Bryan, if you want that, you got to go make some money to go buy for it. Yeah. And Nathan said to me, Keith, I was taught very early by my parents that if I wanted something, I had to go and make money to earn it. He's like, so I was selling lemonade as a young boy. And it's incredible to me, Bryan, this common theme, people coming through the lab that just have this, if you're a teenager and you're probably being an entrepreneur, then you're probably being an entrepreneur.
As you move on to, Keith, you've been an entrepreneur. And I've found that term to be thrown around pretty loosely. And what I mean by that is that, as you can appreciate, to me, it's starting with nothing and building something of value. And people that call themselves entrepreneurs are truly wannabepreneurs, where you're giving $10 million and you make 12 million. That to me is not an entrepreneur, because the risk is taken out. And people say, what is an entrepreneur? Boy, that's a pretty risky scenario. I started with nothing with my apparel company that I had an exit on as well after 10 years. And I say it's an entrepreneur is not one who's a risk taker. He's a risk avoider. He figures out what the risks are, and then he limits that risk exposure. You get $10 million in your pocket, Keith, as neither one of us had at the beginning. And you need to make sure that you understand that's the value. You're only good as your cash flow. So it's one that you have to be protecting at all times.
Brian, I will tell you, I had a revelatory moment. Was it maybe a few weeks ago? Somebody shared with me a recent video from Tony Robbins. I don't spend a lot of time watching his content, but a piece was put in front of me, which asked the question, who are you at your core? And Brian, it moved me, actually. It moved me deeply as somebody who's 88 years old, BC. I'm an old motherfucker, right? So I recognized after I watched that video that it moved me because I realized that after all these years, I finally recognized who I was. Because Tony posed the question. Are you a creator? Are you a manager, business leader? Or are you an entrepreneur? And he phrased it out. And for my whole life, I thought I was an entrepreneur. Keyword thought.
Mm-hmm.
In my core, who I always knew I was, but was perhaps ashamed and embarrassed and was maybe not comfortable talking about it, I'm an artist. I'm a creator. Yes, I started a company, and yes, I exited for lots of money, but I surrounded myself with incredibly brilliant managers and leaders. And I had an entrepreneur business partner who, to be frank, when I think about our roles, he was the guy who took more risk than I was. Yes, I took risk, measured risk, but ultimately, Brian, I want to create. That's what I like to do. I have foregone the ability to make a lot of money in the last 15 years of my life because I just like creating. I love the idea of creating. And that video really moved me and really painted the picture for me and painted the definition of what a true entrepreneur is. Many people think they're entrepreneurs, but they're actually creators with entrepreneurial vibes in them. And those that are manager leaders, they're actually entrepreneurs. I don't care what you say. You come sit in front of me. If you're not willing to put the time in that it takes to be a successful creator or actual entrepreneur, don't even waste your time.
Yeah, I'm a firm believer in that too, Keith, is when you look at, and I'll give you an example of my career early on, is I started out and I've actually got, which served me extremely well, by the way. And it's another story in the path and journey that I took to where I'm at today, is that I left North Dakota with nothing. A buddy of mine from college, I had a semester of school left. I said, I'm on a whim, said, hey, I want to go out to the West Coast. I said, anything west of the Mississippi, I'll take. I just like the Southern California weather. And that's where my independence took over. And to your point is that I got an engineering degree, and most people think he's technical, he's an introvert, he doesn't know how to talk to people, he's not creative. I was the complete opposite. Engineering served me extremely well as an entrepreneur. I'm very data driven. I'm very technical. I know how to plan things. I know how to execute. I know the operations side of the business. So that served me extremely well. But to your point, what are you? And I was blessed with this ability to know and see the vision of the future. I could put things in my head and people would ask me, what is this going to look like in the future? And how do we build this? And what is this product going to look like? And how is it going to serve a purpose that you're commercializing it for? So for me, I was very creative as well. And it was frustrating because I was this engineer stuck in this creative body. And I had a nice engineering job. I was heading up programs on defense industry, and people look at it and say, what'd you do? And I said, I took a left turn. I did a 180-degree turn. I turned to my wife one day and said, I think I want to start an apparel company. And she said, what? You don't know anything about apparel. And I said, I'll learn. I've always asked 1,000,001 questions, so I'll learn how to do it. So I just learned how to do it. I knew I had this creative mindset and I like talking to people. I'm an extrovert and I'm a marketing guy and I'm a product guy. So frustrating for me is that I can't do that as an engineer. I'm creating these great products that are hundreds of millions of dollars programs, but they weren't really satisfying the need I had as a creative mind to want to be able to put something on consumers that actually came from the creative engine that I had in my head. So I made a left turn and started my own apparel company. And I wanted to learn everything from the ground up, probably much like you did, where I just said, hey, you don't know anything about apparel, I immediately surrounded myself with mentors. And I asked a million and one questions, and people that had been successful in the industry, like Bob McKnight of Quicksilver was one of mine. And he just lent me advice when I needed advice. And they were quick questions and quick answers, but valuable answers to questions that I had on where do I go next. And so the step process to being an entrepreneur are, like you said, a lot of people move into an entrepreneurial journey. But for me, when I look at it, if you don't have a passion for what you're doing, you're probably going to fail. And that's why 80% of companies fail in the first 5 years, the other 80% fail in the next 5 years. So it's, if you don't have a passion, you don't wake up day after day looking in the mirror, is this what I want to do the rest of my life? You're going to be challenged to be successful. Because I had all kinds of young entrepreneurs, I'm sure you did, Keith, walking in saying, hey, this is great, I would love to start an apparel company. And I said, don't do it. 99.9% of the time I said, don't do it. And they said, what do you mean? They go, you have no idea what goes into successfully building a company. It's brutal. It's not fun. It's brutal.
You know what? Thanks for saying that, because I think you could say it probably more tactfully and politely than I could, because I've been maybe on a little rant lately in my head and even with some people close around me because, oh man, right? They're just, people just want shortcuts. And I'm not trying, listen, nation, I want to offer grace to all of you. I love all of you. But those of you that think you're fucking entrepreneurs, you're not.
Yeah.
No, but you're not. Like, you don't know the time it takes to build something of significant value. And there is a lot of time and a lot of grief and a lot of stress and a lot of time. Like, my days start at 4:30 a.m. and they end at 11, 12 o'clock. There's no balance.
Right. Yeah.
So nobody should pretend that there's balance. Yes, I've been fortunate that I sold my company and I was pretty chill for a long time. And now I'm back to work and I'm enjoying it. In building phase, Bryan, in creating phase, do you think when Taylor's making her latest album or Drake's making his latest album, he's just checking in for a few minutes and checking out? No.
Yeah. Yeah. It never ends. And I love the journey aspect of it. Is it's a journey. The
You
journey
know,
that kind of never ends until you want it to end. And that
I'm
and
gonna
that's something that people need to keep in mind, is that it's one also I'm sure a lot of people aren't aware of, is that it takes a lot more than just one skill set. To your point, we talked about it
Mhm.
earlier, was what is an entrepreneur? And I use this analogy. I use it in the Visionary brand. There's a chapter in there that I call the artist. And I look at things differently on explaining to people what makes someone visionary or what makes a brand visionary. And one of the aspects of it is this orchestra. Okay. If you've got an orchestra, how do they make this concerto of beautiful music with all these instruments? And all it takes is one to screw it up, right? Somebody that's on the trombone or somebody that's on an instrument that shouldn't be on it. And the analogy I use for that is that people that are in the wrong spot within an orchestra can screw up the entire team.
Mhm.
And when you look at how that construct comes together in a company, it's a similar thing, is that the teams that you build, you're only as good as your team. And your ability as an entrepreneur to be the conductor of this orchestra inside of a company and not only inspire people, but aspire them to build this great brand. And then also have a continual passion every single day you're in the office. That to me is, when you look at the next book I have is The Visionary Leader. So I just finished the manuscript on that one, and it was fun to do because these are the conductors, the men and women that stand in front of the teams and instill this vision and inspire people through their passion every single day to kick ass and take names. It's just one of these that very few people have the skill set to do it. And it's many times inbred. And that's when I look back in my career where I just said, I love the fact that I got an engineering degree, but I'm a creative. I want to use that technical skill set to help others succeed. but I want to build this concerto of a brand that inspires others to want to disrupt an industry. And so that's a huge part of that puzzle.
We're mutually connected, it looks like, through LinkedIn, about somebody who speaks a similar language to you, which is around being a visionary. Justin Breen. Familiar, Justin? Colby Index.
I'm not.
Okay. Are you, which is fine. That's
Yeah.
completely fine. Are you familiar with Colby though? Like KOLBE?
KLBE. No, I'm not.
Okay. Which to me is surprising, I think,
Yeah.
because you're speaking about, you've mentioned visionary a number of times. It's clearly within your lexicon. It's in your marketing. It's what you're selling.
Yep.
You speak as a visionary, but the whole Colby Index talks about being a visionary. And I know Justin was on my show a while back, and he called me out as a visionary because he asked me to do the Colby Index, and many of the things you're talking about, I can relate to. And I'm curious, when you think of being a visionary, Bryan, what does that mean to you?
It's a couple things. And if you're talking about like the first book, I'll just give an example. And when I looked at what I found intriguing when I started putting pen to paper, Keith, was the question of what makes a brand visionary? And I said a brand first because I knew I was going to go to a leader and I was going to go to a product.
Yes.
The fortunate thing that I had, and I'm very blessed with it, is that I've been inside of brands that others consider very visionary. Like Oakley was very visionary, but we had a visionary leader, probably second to none for the most part, is Jim Gennard, who went on to start Red Digital and now has another ventures, and he sold Oakley and he sold Red Digital recently to another Nikon to spot them.
Mm-hmm.
So when I look at a visionary, what I found is I didn't really find a visionary company. I just said there isn't one that has all of these, what I call elements of a formula. Even Apple came very close, but even Apple had its flaws to being a visionary brand. And I just found that it inspires people to say, what does it take? It's a building block of a lot of different pieces that make up a visionary brand. And a piece of that is having a visionary leader. And what is a visionary leader? It's truly first and foremost somebody that has set a vision, builds a vision, inspires that vision, is passionate about it every single day while he's in the office, and bleeds that vision and passion through the hallways of the business and the community that engages with that brand and their products. And it's selling also not just a product, but it's also selling a lifestyle. I always use this quote, Keith, where a lot of people try to understand what makes a visionary product, but what makes a visionary brand, as Ralph Lauren famously said a long time ago, because I'm not selling a product, I'm selling the lifestyle. I thought that was just brilliant on Ralph's part. Because people look at it and they go, there are a lot of brands that have great products with that shitty marketing that doesn't make them a visionary. So having the two combined, like an Apple, with having Steve at the helm and have him be set a vision for the future of what consumers don't know they need yet. And I go back to Henry Ford, where Henry Ford said, hell, if I would have asked my consumer what they wanted, they would have told me a faster horse. So it's one of these where you have to anticipate what your consumers are going to need. Now, you can be an innovation or it can be a disruption. Disruption is innovation on steroids. People ask me the difference between these two. And Steve disrupted the music industry, but he had an innovative product to do it. So he had a weapon in his hand to disrupt the music industry through the iPod. So that was very visionary.
You speak of examples like Apple, which touches so many of us.
Mm-hmm.
Daily, so many brands launch, try to be like Apple, yet fail miserably on the marketing side of things. Connecting with a human being as a brand would seem to be so simple, yet it is so difficult to try to elicit that emotion. Why is that, Bryan? Is it lumped into that one perhaps overused word of being authentic, and maybe the second word, values, and so forth? Like what makes a visionary brand last forever, emote feelings from the consumers, take it through the good times and bad times. Apple's going through a rough patch right now with their marketing,
Yeah.
with their iPad. I'd love to hear your comment on that for the last week or so.
Yep.
What allows consumers to look even past that past ad of Apple going, okay, bump in the road, I still love them?
Yeah, there's a couple of things, Keith. One is foundational principles that they stick to that are authentic. And what I mean by that is, let's just say, I'm going to use an example. So let's just say you have a team inside of your new company called Apple II. And you, as a supposed visionary, stand in front of your team and evangelize these foundational principles of who you are, what you stand for, what your vision is, and what you're passionate about, and what you're going to be doing in order to achieve and execute that strategy. And then you violate that. You say you're a premium product. So there, in the consumer product example, there's good, better, best. Apple's best. So as soon as they put a crappy good product out there, it gets confusion into the marketplace and it goes into a distribution channel people are confused by. So it violates the principles as a visionary brand. Okay, so how Apple was able to get around that principle, which was brilliant. If you look at the supply and demand curve, they actually drop products on the back end of the supply and demand curve, which they need to do to drive revenue, but it's all previous generation stuff. Okay,
Instead,
it's the it's the iPhone. Who the hell needs the latest iPhone? The iPhone 14 works great. The iPhone 12 works great. So what they do is they dump it, and it's acceptable to the consumer to drop the previous gens on the back end, lower the price, and it doesn't reduce brand equity at all. On the front end, they got early adopters that are paying full price for their products. So it's Steve was brilliant on that side. So in answer to your question on what makes them generational is they have an innovation pipeline. And this is where Tim Cook has now officially bled all of Steve's equity out of Apple. He's got nothing left. He has no innovation pipeline. He has nothing he can pull out of his pocket anymore. And that's where that innovation pipeline, Steve had a decade. If I was going to look at the whiteboard of Steve, he says, listen, I need to have 10 years worth of innovation pipeline. So I can surf this thing for 10 years. And I'm going to be consistently above the competition on every single product they release. And they're not just progressive updates. The other thing that a visionary brand does as well is they actually move out of their product line, probably one of their most popular products, which is an oxymoron for a brand to do, is, and I use a case example in the book where I said Sony with the Walkman. Sony was an inspiration for Steve on the iPod, but they just never dropped it out of their supply curve. They just kept it going for 20 years and made a ton of money, but there was no innovation pipeline. So what Steve did is at the peak of popularity, he would pull his most popular product off the shelf and he would pull in a new generation. And he would create this massive supply and demand front end curve, high price point, full price products that people were purchasing. That's what's happening with Apple right now, Keith, is innovation pipeline depletion and nothing on the front end of the innovation curve where early adopters are going to purchase it for full price. So it's margin compression as well. So it's all of these different things that are now snowballing with Apple that people are now bored. The latest product that they had was a pen and a new iPad. That's not waking people up in the middle of the night to run out and buy a product at the Apple store.
I would argue that their latest innovation was the AVP launched in January, which got them some traction up until May, and it'll be reignited here in June at WWDC, which they'll launch international expansion, which will get them through the rest of the year and another number of months of traction. POV on that.
See there again, I think, and I agree with you, Keith. I think that's an innovation, and it's actually what they call an adaptation of Oculus. It's like,
yes,
they were late to the game again. So it's,
I would say, Brian, that the industry was waiting for Apple's reference design.
right.
Like I would say that Zuck and the gang was okay. We want to see what Apple's going to do, so at least we have a reference design. Listen, like yourself, I'm nerd. I before I started this thing, I had a legacy business in the VR/AR space because I saw the AVP coming out, and I saw that it was inevitable that Meta was going to release their OS just like Android did. So everything Meta has done, I'm like, oh yeah, it just seems obvious because history just repeats itself, and that's what I find fascinating with brands. And people want to reinvent new things. It's like, no, just go back into the history books and look at it and tweak it up and It's a cycle. It's not linear. There's cycles happen in society.
Yeah, and the reason I mentioned that as, and I'll mention a couple other things. The reason I mentioned that as a incremental improvement or an adaptation of a product that was out there is, again, it's just such a great example that everybody knows about is the iPod. Is that the Sony Walkman was his inspiration for it, but look at how different the structure of the iPod was. You could put it in your, like the Walkman was, it was
I remember.
bulky. You couldn't use it. People that remember it. But the iPod was, and Steve knew it, which was brilliant. 1,000 songs in your pocket. Think back to that statement he made. And at the time, the form and function was light years different from Sony Walkman. But if you look at Oculus versus the Apple version, to form and function, form is very similar. Function is a little bit different. And I just feel people look at it, and that's where you see the reaction of it, Keith, is a little bit of hum and haw. And we thought that you guys would be early to the game, or you'd make it look like a pair of Oakley sunglasses where I could just slip it on and people don't even know I'm wearing it. And I just think I think form is the biggest issue that they're going to have to deal with, is that if they would have reinvented the form and function, they would have had a much better reception, not only from consumers, but from investors as well. I mean, as everybody is, I'm an Apple investor. But I think the other aspect of it, in addition to the innovation pipeline, is that these visionary brands also know their positioning. They know where they need to be in the marketplace. They have a creative engine that's built this innovation pipeline. They have this strategy around the product vision that nobody else has. And they really know what the future looks like. And this is where so many brands fail, is there's only so many Steve Jobs that can see the future. No, and on top of that, even those that would be classified as visionaries, many of them refuse to take risk. They just don't want to take risk. They want to have somebody else take risk. That's a commodity brand, not a brand itself. And I say that in the book as well. I go, you're either a commodity or you're a brand. And a good analogy is Nike's a brand, Skechers is a commodity.
100%. Yes.
So that's just what visionary brands are. And you mentioned it earlier, Keith. The other piece of this, and it can't be said enough, is just creating this authentication of who you are and what you stand for, and not changing your foundational principles as a brand is critical to success long term and generations. And that's what I found in looking at all the brands prior to writing the book, was what is this common thread? And I just found that is a pieces of the puzzle that I put together on this formula, that a lot of people had them, but nobody had all of these. Somebody had one of these elements of a visionary brand that wasn't there. But Apple was probably the closest when Steve was there. So it's a different story right now. It's nobody's holding their breath at an Apple event anymore.
No, they certainly are going through a different time. The world's in a different place. China is not their best friend when it comes to making product. They're having to their whole business is frankly in shift. I'll use that word, right?
Yeah.
They canceled the car project. It is intriguing to me, because the question I would have for you, Bryan, is it not difficult for a brand like Apple to innovate when my mom doesn't want them to innovate? No, don't change the phone. I want it to be this way. Right. So you know what I mean? Where Coke innovated, they introduced new Coke, and we all know how that went over. Right. So sometimes brands can innovate too far. What's that risk, Bryan Smeltzer?
I'll go back and I'll just keep on that same thread there with looking at a product. And not a lot of visionaries think this way. They don't think from the consumer's perspective. And I'll go back to Keith, the creator side of us, right? Is when Apple was great and when Apple was visionary, is when in the room with designers were poets. And I'm a huge believer in creatives, like people that are in touch with Mother Nature, people that go out and touch the leaves and walk through the grass on bare feet, and people that get outside the four walls and see how people actually use product. And also anticipating an easier way to do it. And there's three words that when you look at a product, that's a brilliant way to look at what you just mentioned as an issue for people, is simple as sophisticated. When you look at Steve releasing, and I use it because it's just a thread we're on, is the iMac, right? He said 1, 2, 3. He made it friendly. He made the computer friendly. He said, number one, open the box. Number two, plug it in. Number three, hit the power button. If you have to read the instructions, it's too hard. So he challenged his design team to think as a consumer. And one that I look at that I get frustrated by every time I get in people's cars is their car. I'm going, there's too damn many buttons in here. I go back to a car 10 years ago that didn't have all these buttons, and I was perfectly fine with it. I don't want to, number one, I don't want to pay for all this crap. Plus, I don't use 95% of it. So that, to me, I agree with you. If designers are just sitting in a room and all they're thinking about is the next great function without eliminating, they don't eliminate, they add. And what they need to look at is, are people actually using this, and do we need to continue to have it built into our cars? And what should we be doing that's more simplified for consumers and the experience itself? And that's it's a big downfall for brands that think. And what I found in looking at brands that do that, Keith, is they don't get in the body of the consumer. They don't get in the body of your grandma that will buy a laptop computer, and how to make it simple. So a second grader, third graders are pretty sophisticated now. So I go back to first grade. so
Yeah.
where they can actually pop it open and use it right away. I think that's a big aspect to it as well.
It's the idea of is the idea of the brand overused in 2024? Everything, everybody is a brand. Is that an overused term, Bryan Smeltzer? And we've lost somewhat of a definition of it in many ways.
Yeah, and I purposely use the word in the book, the visionary brand, because brands and it's a very simple thing when you look at it out in the industry, especially with
Yes.
consumer products or even services, is that, are you selling a lifestyle or are you selling a product? Skechers is selling a product. They're not, I don't care how many
Yes.
marketing commercials they do, it's not a lifestyle. They're not aspiring anybody to wear Skechers. But when you look at, and again, this is another case study, and it goes towards what you're mentioning, is just think of the Just Do It campaign. Okay. The aspirational side of that campaign is second to none in consumer products, and nobody's come close to ever replicating it. Every single piece of that marketing campaign was built around aspirational product and lifestyle. People felt if they put on a pair of Jordans that they would be able to jump like Michael. But all of the campaign itself was built around a brand and a lifestyle that they were selling to consumers that aspired them to want to buy their products and wear their products. And I do think that when people classify themselves as the brand, I think it does become very diluted as to, why do you think you're a brand? Do you think you've earned your stripes to be calling yourself a brand? And just because you have a product does not mean you're a brand. I think that's where it becomes diluted, Keith, is, hey, we made new footwear. What's your marketing? And when you look at a brand in a company, Keith, it's all driven by the product team. And I call it, when in the book, I call it the power triad. Every brand that I've been with, we've had product taking the lead on what the brand stands for. And then there's the power triad, which is product marketing is in the room with the designers and the product team as to, why are you designing it this way? And one of the products that Nike built was the Flywire product. If you remember it, it disrupted the footwear industry. It was with K-Swiss. I said, if anybody ever comes out with a brand that crosses over to casual and run, we're dead, because that's what the classic K-Swiss sneaker was built around. And Nike came up with Flywire. But the whole base and foundation of Flywire, and the reason marketing needs to be on the team with the design team, is they actually went out into the real world and looked at things that they could adapt to products that they were creating. Of all things, where do you think Flywire, the construction and inherent overall build of that product, came from? It came from suspension bridges.
Really?
If you look at suspension bridges, and what they looked at, the designers looked at how it actually moved, the structure actually moved with the environment. And it actually was suspended in midair. So they were looking at it, and they put the foot inside of the suspension bridge, and the wires folded over the top of the foot. And all of a sudden, now you have a shoe that no longer needs leather. And what they used was a material that had never been used before called Vectran, which is 10 times stronger than steel, but it looks like a fishing wire. And they were able to integrate that in with knit. So I'm just saying that brands have a story, products don't. I mean, it's why were you doing that? Because we wanted to be able to disrupt an industry, tell a story, and provide a lifestyle that people could enjoy. Now people go buy groceries and then a half an hour later out running without having changed their shoes, and Nike changed the whole landscape of footwear.
Brilliant story. Because many marketers think a brand is just setting up a nice logo, putting a tagline,
Yeah.
spending some marketing dollars and showing up on stage and saying, hey, I'm here. I got a nice shirt and so forth. But really, behind the scenes, the looking at the suspension bridges, sitting down with your design team, your engineering team, first principles thinking, coming back to the values of why we exist and trying to solve a problem to disrupt. And then out of that, oh, there's the brand attributes along the way too. But that's what an exceptional story to share.
Yeah. And I share that story because it goes to the next piece of that visionary brand, Keith, is if you can imagine being a marketer,
Yeah.
when they put up on the concept board, how the hell did you come up with that design? And all of a sudden, suspension bridges come up, foundational,
Oh,
footing, bolts. You don't think that there's another section in the book where I call the fuel is the marketing. The fuel of a brand is marketing, your ability to aspire people to want to purchase that product. And Nike's got it, Apple's got it. And that's just that second level of when you say a brand versus a commodity. And that is a story where that's the juice that keeps that brand going for generations.
I can only imagine the behind the scenes of that meeting when everybody gets together and yeah, so we came up with this new shoe and here's how we came up with it. Because the creatives on the marketing team, you can just see their heads spinning, right? You can just see the excitement coming to life
Yeah.
going, oh my goodness, I can't wait to go tell this story and that story and this story and that story. And then it's okay, we can't tell all the stories. We got to pick a story.
Yeah.
Like, what an exciting time that must have been when those things come together. And
Well, yeah. And that's why on the design and inspiration on the product, Keith, that's why Steve was always locking arms with design.
yes, of course, of course. And I know we're up against the clock here, and I got to have you back for round two because I'm thoroughly in love with our conversation right now. Bryan, a brand to me that I pay a lot of attention to. I've been a member of their company for a number of years. I'm fascinated by the business. I've been fascinated by watching the business start from what it was to what happened during the pandemic to where it sits today. And of course, I'm going to refer to my beloved Peloton, the lost brand, the littlest hobo,
Yeah. Yeah.
the brand that
You're
was,
dedicated, man.
and I'm dedicated because I'm fascinated by maybe seeing it come out. Maybe I'll be one of the old school, maybe I'll be the Richard Simmons of the Peloton era at some point. But what a fascinating business case
Yeah.
that brand has gone on, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's definitely a brand that had its cycle relative to what was going on in the world at the time, right? As the
Mhm.
people were anchored at home. But it does fall, Keith, into this at-home exercise category. And I don't know what the number is, but it's plus 90% that stuff comes in the house, gets used once, then it becomes a dust collector. And I just think Peloton had to overcome that. I think people want to be engaged with others at the gym or engaged with people that you look at what their concept was is to artificially get them involved with other people through video. And that can be challenging for people that want to be able to work out in an environment where they see others inside the room with them. But yeah, Peloton's a funny one. I didn't feel that Peloton would make it beyond COVID, to be honest. I felt somebody would either acquire them or they would come out much smaller than they were and or reposition. Now they're trying to reposition by selling the machines into Dick's Sporting Goods, who we're very familiar with. So they've changed the model as well, which has gone outside the scope of what they were originally trying to do. Now they're just becoming an equipment company, which wasn't the original intent. To me, they should have just been a content company and sell that content and work with brands that already had established equipment base and just be good at content building. Content and equipment was a recipe for failure. It'd be very difficult to be good at both, being a foundation for that, knowing who you're up against in the marketplace, much bigger players.
Yeah,
So
they've made some significant changes as of late, which I've
yeah,
been quite closely and quite intimately. Barry McCarthy is out. Their pivot to a content heavy strategy is private equity firms are looking at them. They are getting smaller. I would say that they're going to narrow in on what they're good at. They have a low churn rate. They have a very dedicated customer base. The problem is they got lost during the pandemic, and to your point, they really got lost of what they were and weren't ready for the world to become what it was again.
yeah. And another good story too, Keith, is I don't know if you've read the book Shoe Wars, but it's the story of Puma versus Adidas, and that's the Adidas brothers. Hey, by the way, I'm very proud of you for actually pronouncing Adidas the way it should be pronounced, not Adidas. I was
Yeah.
actually a quick story on that is I was actually in a room when in this case, my term was Adidas with the German leadership group from Adidas that would come over when we were working with TaylorMade and Adidas. And I was actually sitting in the room, no kidding. I was actually sitting in the room and they kept referring to Adidas. And I elbowed my buddy next to me. I go, "What the hell is Adidas?" And they go, "It's Adidas." I go, "Oh, okay. All right." I felt that's a true story. I go, "Oh
Oh,
my God."
that's
I go,
funny.
"What the hell is Adidas?" I've never heard anybody, even in America, we don't say Adidas. That's what
I
I was.
know. Yeah, it's a true story. Yeah.
But Pumas, I can count on my right hand how many companies have come out through the grave, and Puma's one of them that had done it successfully and was able to bring it back to where it was in its glory days. So it was a real turnaround story, but
That's
very few
interesting.
are able to do it.
And why is that?
Because once you violate your foundational principles and you violate trust with your consumer and your demographic that you're selling to, Keith, nothing against it, but there's a reason Nike has athletes all over the place on there. It's an aspirational brand.
Yes.
And when you start moving into the Costco's of the world, the distribution channel, your brand equity goes along with it. And it's hard to pull that out. And retailers, by the way, don't forget that. Neither do consumers. And it's a very hard thing to turn around. I had a brand called Avia that had approached us wanting to try and do the same thing. And they just referenced Puma. And I said, you have an extra $20 million sitting around. I said, that's just enough to reestablish the US market. I said, but there's no guarantee that they're going to be able to trust you anymore. And they go, what do you mean trust? And I said, you've already violated and broke that trust. So all they do is now they remember a brand that was sold in Target. And now you want to sell Nordstrom's? I said, it's just a hard thing to overcome.
Quickly before we go, explain to me how brands effectively navigate the idea of selling in a premium mall and then have themselves set up in a secondary mall where you have the Nike store at the main mall, then you have the Nike at the outlet mall. How do they manage that brand perception? Is it the same way that Apple does it, just differently, which is, hey, you don't need the brand new iPhone, you're good enough with the iPhone 14? Is it that same thing, which is, hey, you can buy these products over here. We want to get you in because we want you to aspire to go to the real store to buy the product?
The intent, and I'll give you a story of what we did with Oakley on the Oakley stores, is that we had retail presence. So it's a three-edged sword, if you call it, Keith. You've got the retail distribution, you've got your regular store distribution, like it's inside a mall where Nordstrom's already is. So that's challenge one. Challenge two then is you do an outlet. Outlets were meant to be, you're out in the middle of nowhere
Yes.
and there's no malls. So the competition and the foot traffic from a regional basis is not an issue. But it quickly turned out to be where now everybody's doing the outlet business. And what they started doing was making products specific to the outlet. And what they would say is this is outlet only product. And then you would have what they call inline product, which is the same as what the retailers were carrying. And you had what's called, and here's how they got around it, not to get too technical, but just how they got around it, Keith, was there's a thing called minimum advertised pricing, right? And you're beholden to it as much as the retailer is. So let's say I've got a $200 Oakley frog skin that I'm selling. I'm now a retailer, outlet or not. I'm a retailer and I'm held to that MAP 20% max discount policy. Nordstrom's can't discount at 40%. I can't discount at 40%. So in order to get around that, we put in there limited edition product that were specific to outlets. You have in what they call inline product, and you have exclusive product for outlet distribution. And they were able to navigate around that. Plus, a lot of times it isn't competing with foot traffic at retail.
Interesting. I've often wondered that. I've often wondered how
Yeah.
that whole model works.
Not easy.
Yeah, no kidding. No kidding.
Yeah.
Bryan Smeltzer, I know we got to rock and roll here. I've thoroughly enjoyed the conversation, learning. I believe I probably can I have a lot more curious questions in my mind, but we're up against the clock. Is there anything that I have not asked you about? Is there anything Nation needs to know about? Where can they get the book? Where can they connect with you?
Yeah.
Liquid Mind. How can Business Athlete Nation get a hold of Bryan Smeltzer?
Yeah. So I currently run Liquid Mind, which is a global brand strategy firm. We predominantly work with consumer products, large cap through entrepreneurs. I also am on the board of UCLA and UCI, where I work with venture accelerator programs and innovation and entrepreneurship programs. So we give back to those programs as well. And you can go on the site. We also offer free meetings just to ask questions.
Yeah.
And then the Visionary brand is sold at all distribution outlets. And it was actually an Amazon bestseller. We won the Reader's Favorite Award for Best Marketing Genre Book and Business category. So very fortunate to that, and always blessed to know that people like the book. But probably the most important thing for me is people that reach out to me and say how they've been able to apply it to their business, and both personally and professionally. Because I do have personal, I know that entrepreneurs go through a lot, and I've got some personal advice in there as well as to what they're going through on the courage side of the book as well. So that's where people can reach out and email me. I'm at the Bryan at liquidmindsight.com, and let me know if you got any questions. And hey, but most important, Keith, I appreciate you having me on, and I'd love to jump back on with you and tell some more Winnipeg, Manitoba stories. And
yeah, and more branding stories. I love talking branding because it's everybody's a branding expert, but nobody's a branding expert. And that's why I've been really intrigued listening to you, because you've been through the trenches and you're sharing things with me that I have not considered before. And I know that these are valuable conversations because everybody's a brand expert and everybody's talking about personal brand. And it's an overused concept, which I think, again, when you sit down and talk to somebody with some expertise and some knowledge, oh yeah, I get it. I think about that a little differently.
Yeah. And I think the valuable part of that too, Keith, I talk about is that, and I had to deal with it when I was at the brands themselves, is that I always deal with these marketing agencies and marketing people who would come in and help and support us. But I found our team having to teach them about our brand. The majority of them have never been inside the four walls of a brand. So I think that's to your point, a huge advantage. And what I love passing on to your audience is people will ask me, what was it like to be inside of Oakley during the bad boy days, pre-IPO? We didn't give a shit. We did whatever we wanted.
Yes.
And we were kicking ass and taking names, and we were number one, and everybody was left in the dust. And being inside of those brands in different categories as well, a footwear brand, an eyewear brand, a golf brand, a global iconic sportswear brand. So it's a pretty diversified background, but people ask me all the time, what was it like? So I lent that experience inside the book, and also conversations like this, which are helpful for those that say it's not book smarts. It's actually four wall smarts.
It's exactly the experience of what it is.
Yeah.
All right, Mr. Smeltzer, I'm going to ask you to stick around the green room for a quick second. I'm going to say goodbye to Business Athlete Nation, and I'll come back and politely walk you.
Thanks again, Keith. I appreciate it.
100%, my friend. Hang tight. We're going to do this here. We're going to do this here, and bring some music back into the lab. What's going on, Nation? Hey, if you just joined us late, I invite you to go back to the beginning. Bryan Smeltzer, Liquid Mind, the Vision Chronicles podcast. The guy has been around for Oakley, K-Swiss, TaylorMade, Adidas, Schutz Sports and Arena. Everybody talks about being a brand expert. You're not a brand expert. You got to go talk to a brand expert. His name's Bryan Smeltzer. True story. All right, so listen, tomorrow morning's in the lab. Myself, C. Marty Fit, friends, and everybody else who wants to join. We just, come on, join the conversation. We're having great things. You talk about a personal brand. You talk about a brand. The Business Athlete Performance Lab is a brand doing this. Mornings in the Lab is a brand doing this. Live in the Lab with guests like Bryan Smeltzer is doing this. I've been saying all along. We're in the clubs. We're on the way to the arenas. And you know what? We're on our way to the stadium. We'll see you guys.